Took a few questions through topics that people were asking on social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc. Was asking about mental health and insulin sensitivity. Someone said, hey, I've heard that protein can turn into sugar if I eat too much of it. Next question, next topic. We've got heat and weather impacting blood sugars. Is this actually true? When did you start to take control of your life with type 1 diabetes? So probably when do you, Ben, start to get more independent with your diabetes care? So welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. And today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So took a few questions through topics that people were asking on social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc. and figured, hey, let's just jam on each of these a little bit. Similar to when I do an Instagram or a TikTok live, which if you want to see more of those, comment below this, shoot me a message, tell me, hey, we want more of the lives where I answer questions, rant about different topics, and we just have a great time. It's always a fun time. But anyways, that being said, first question that came in was asking about mental health and insulin sensitivity. So for example, when people are super stressed, when people are depressed, having a really tough time, whether it's with their diabetes and their personal life, how that can impact your insulin sensitivity. And boy, can it impact your insulin sensitivity or what? Have you ever noticed when you're super stressed, maybe you have a big exam coming up, you're in school, maybe you're having arguments with your family, with your significant other, maybe you are just having a ton of work projects piling up and there's deadlines and you're feeling the pressure and you're just stressed out of your mind and you notice that your blood sugar is just high and it just will not budge and it will not move. Doesn't matter what you do, it just will not make any sort of movement downward. That is the impact of mental health on blood sugars. And I tell people all the time, your subconscious mind has to be relaxed. Meaning you can tell yourself, I'm fine, this is great, everything's okay. None of that matters until your subconscious mind latches onto that and says, I am okay. I am going to be good. And your body relaxes, gets out of that fight or flight state. Because when you're in fight or flight, what happens? Your cortisol levels rise. Cortisol, I'm not going to call it a demon hormone, but effectively from a blood sugar standpoint, it's exactly what it is. It says, hey body, you're getting chased by a wild saber-toothed tiger or a dinosaur or a bear, whatever, an angry mob of people with pillowcases full of rocks that want to run at you and scare the bejeebers out of you, whatever it is, right? That being said, cortisol says dump glucose, liver, go. Dump glucose from the liver, break down muscle into glucose so your body has energy to make moves to try to survive. And it can be, again, something seemingly as benign as you have a work project that's due and you're super, super anxious about it. You're super stressed about it. You have anxiety, you have depression, you're sad about stuff. That mental state can and will impact your blood sugars because body and mind are extremely closely connected. So what happens? You end up more insulin resistant because you've got all this glucose being dumped and you've got protein being broken down into glucose. That is a tough situation. And as a result of that, your blood sugar can stay higher. And so I always tell people, hey, meditate, do something to be mindful, be present, get into the moment right now. Because a lot of times, anxiety, all of these things, you're either living in the future or you're living in the past. Something that already happened that you're anxious about, something that you're worried about could happen in the future. And let's be real, 98% of the things you worry about in the future are likely never going to happen. But by putting those vibes out there, you are making it more likely that they could happen. So we definitely want to try to avoid that as much as possible. But mental and physical health are very much so connected. You might notice when you're super stressed, your body gets worn down, you can get sick more easily, your immune system is suppressed, which it already is living with diabetes in the first place. There's a lot of different pieces involved and in play here. Mental health absolutely can impact your blood sugars. So make sure you are focusing on that. I still believe every single person on this planet would benefit from a therapist. That's just me. But I see one, I have seen one. It's been absolutely life-changing. So make sure you are paying attention, emphasizing your mental health. Similar note to the previous one because it talks about protein converting into glucose. Someone said, hey, I've heard that protein can turn into sugar if I eat too much of it. Yes, it can. Protein is an interesting beast. That's why you might notice people, oh, I'm eating really low carb, but my blood sugar's still going up and I don't know why. Here's the deal with protein. Your body's smart, right? And protein is a way that your body can create glucose because glucose is going to be the body's most convenient and easily used energy source. So let's just say, for context, you decide to nix the carbs. I'm going to go really low carb. Your body's like, I need some glucose. Where am I going to get it from? Protein can break down into glucose, whether it's from the muscle, whether it's protein that you've eaten. So if you eat a meal that's very low carb, carbs cannot spare protein because there's no carbs available. Carbs typically spare protein. I always say, think of the Hunger Games. I offer myself as tribute. That's what the carbs are doing, and it protects the protein. In this case, there's no carbs. So protein can break down, and about 60% of that protein will convert into glucose because there's nothing protecting it. Now, are there other situations where you can still have carbs and the protein will still break down? Yes, absolutely. If you eat a gigantic steak, you go eat a massive amount of protein because you're hungry on Thanksgiving. That protein can convert into glucose, but remember, it's not as fast. If you eat a bowl of cereal, you'll notice the impact on your blood sugar probably within 20, 30 minutes. If you eat 10 ounces of chicken, you're probably not going to notice it for an hour, 90 minutes, a little bit longer, but eventually it will come back. And depending on the type of protein, you can also determine how high you rise, etc., how big of a rise you have, how long of a duration it takes. There's a lot more into the weeds we can go here, but protein can and will raise your blood sugar. Fat independently likely won't. Minuscule amount, maybe a few grams. You took shots of olive oil, not recommending it, but if you did, you would probably notice a tiny change in blood sugar. It's fat in the context of carbs and protein where things can get a little wonky. So next question, next topic, we've got heat and weather impacting blood sugars. Is this actually true? Yes. Right now, you might notice weather's getting a little cooler in a lot of parts of the country and your blood sugars may be changing. I remember most vividly, to illustrate the heat part of things, I grew up in the Midwest and we would occasionally come down to Florida in the winter because my parents were going nuts and they hated the snow. So we'd come down and I would notice that first couple days, my blood sugar was constantly dropping because the heat, think about, if we're going to get super nerdy and you know the physics world and all that, the heat's basically making the insulin work faster in the body. And my body at the time, we're used to 10 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees. You come down to somewhere like Florida where it's 55 or 60, your body's like, whoa, this is crazy. And so it starts to move everything a lot faster. So you might also notice, okay, you go from a climate that's colder to warmer, you are suddenly way more insulin sensitive. On the flip side, you go from warmer to colder, you can get more insulin resistant. Now, this doesn't happen to everybody. A lot of people in a recent post I did were like, hey, sometimes I go up when it's warm outside. Sometimes I go down when it's cold outside. It's all person dependent. It's all context dependent. A lot of times when it's cold outside, but you're active, you can drop faster because your body's trying to keep you warm in addition to the activity that you're doing. But if you're sitting on your butt because it's cold, you're less likely to be outside. You're less likely to be moving as much. You're less likely to go out and walk your dog or go out and just take a walk in the neighborhood because it's really cold and you don't want to be outside and it's not comfortable, which can then impact your blood sugar as well. So keep that part in mind too. Coldness, weather can impact your blood sugar. Could be a conversation to have with your care team in the near future about, do I need to make adjustments? Because my blood sugar might get a little funky if I don't. Next one. This is somebody newer diagnosed. What is considered a high blood sugar? That is a relative term. So if we go by the standard textbook, someone will say blood sugar's over 126, therefore it's a problem, right? You go that detailed. From a person with diabetes standpoint, my mind is, where do you want to typically be would be a better way I would look at this question. If you could be between 70 and 150, I'd say you're doing pretty solid. Just think about it. If your blood sugar just sat at the 150 line, you never moved, you were 150 all day, every day, your A1C would be about 6.9, 6.8. Wouldn't be great. Wouldn't be terrible. It would be under the 7 that everybody says is the magical number. But on the flip side, it's not that much under the 7. But that's ultimately how I would look at it. Now, obviously, you want to be under that more often. We want to be in the 6s, low 6s, high 5s with minimal variability, which there's only so much of that we can control. But on the flip side, what we're looking for here is, what's a high blood sugar? I usually say over 180. And I say that because 180 is that threshold where your body says, I need to get rid of this extra glucose. So it will start trying to have you pee more to pee out the excess glucose, which can get you more dehydrated, which can then feed into a higher blood sugar, which is no bueno. So that is where I personally see as a high blood sugar. But at the same time, for me on my Dexcom, I keep the high bar at 150 because of the reason I just told you. Like I don't like being above 150. If I am, I don't feel my best. I don't feel that great. But again, it's different for everyone. Some people set their high bar at 200. Some set it for 250. Depends on if you're a kid, right? Kids are going to be a little more volatile because they're smaller. So less insulin can have a lot bigger of an impact. It's a lot of different moving pieces here. Of course, make sure you have a good idea with your care team before making any decision like this. Next one would be similar vein. When did you start to take control of your life with type 1 diabetes? So probably when do you, Ben, start to get more independent with your diabetes care? And I'm grateful, yet also it was tough at times during the moment. But in retrospect, I'm grateful. My parents threw me into the fire right away. So I was diagnosed when I was 7 years old. I was about to be 8 years old. It was almost, not exactly 25 years ago, but pretty close. And that being said, by the time I was a month in, I was already dosing up my own insulin. I was taking the clear and the cloudy insulin back in the Stone Ages and mixing them in the syringe and making sure I had the right amount. And I would verify with my parents it was the correct amount, and then I would take it. So I was injecting myself within a few weeks, even though I wasn't even 8 years old, measuring out insulin pretty early. I was counting my carbs by the time I was 8. It was definitely a lot for a kid. But the other thing was, I feel like from a transitionary standpoint, it wasn't as difficult to transition into middle school, high school, because I was already in there doing a lot of the math. And then once I got on a pump, I think I was in fifth grade, I went onto a pump, and it was a lot easier to say, okay, I can dial up 20 carbs and it'll tell me what to dose and I'm good. And then the pumps with adding the bolus wizard with the 20 carbs and what your blood sugar is and all this other stuff, it got a little bit easier. But I really think it's important, if you're diagnosed younger, to try to get a hold on it pretty quick. Late elementary school, early middle school, for sure by middle school, starting to take some independence and control from it. Because otherwise what ends up happening is you end up being this kid who's in high school, your parents still control everything. They count your carbs, they help you with your dose. You don't know what to do. So when you want to start hanging out with your friends, you don't know what to do. So then your parents are concerned, they're constantly over your shoulder. And then on the flip side, you're over here thinking, oh, my mom's always here, my dad's always here, someone's always texting me and bothering me, when all you want to do is be hanging out with your friends. And so I think it's that much more important to say, I am going to start getting a grip on this myself. And again, it might be something simple where, hey, every day I'm going to pack my lunch and count up my carbs and verify with my parents and say, hey, I'm going to verify that this is 63 grams of carbs. I think this is 32 grams of carbs. I know there's fat here, so I'm going to watch out in an hour and a half. Like those little kinds of things, even if it's just one meal a day, are going to start to stack on top of one another to a point where eventually you're dosing, you're doing your thing. And not to say your fam forgets, but I have a middle brother who has autism. And so a lot of times there'd be people coming in to help out and we would all get to meet them, all that fun stuff. And I remember I was probably 10, 11. So my mom was trying to get a babysitter for us. And she told them all about my brother and we introduced. And then I asked my mom, did you tell this person that I have diabetes? She's like, oh my God, I almost forgot. Because first of all, the spotlight was on my brother. But at the same time, I had taken over so much of it at that point of I'm counting up the carbs. I might not be perfect, but I'm at least trying, right? Like I'm trying to do the dosing on time. I'm trying to do all these things. I'm dialing up on my pump where, again, it made my life a lot easier because I knew, and at the time it sucked, right? It was like, oh God, I have to pack my lunch. I'm 11 years old. There are people I knew that their parents were packing their lunches into high school. I'm like, that would be super convenient. That would save me a bunch of time. But as a result, I was able to then do a lot of other things. And I wasn't as reliant on my parents as I got older, which made life a lot easier. So that was a really long-winded way of saying I would start by late elementary school, early middle school, and make sure for sure by early high school, you're starting to get that independence where you can be away from your fam for an extended period of time, a few hours. They don't have to be worrying about you. Maybe they're watching your CGM because they're CGMs now. I didn't have that back in the day. But at the same time that hey, there's a system in place. You've talked with your family. You're very open about things. And there's an open line of communication where they're not hovering over your shoulder, but at the same time, they know that they can trust you, that you're going to be able to reach out if you need help or if there's a problem or troubleshooting, et cetera. And then you start learning these things slowly over time. Maybe, like I said, you're counting carbs at one meal. Maybe you're estimating carbs at a meal and you're cross-checking with somebody. but really making sure that you're putting a little bit of time and effort into this earlier than later. So then you're not having to figure it out when there's already a million other things in life. Like, again, a prime example, when you think about, learning a language when you're a really little kid, it's really easy to, well, I don't know, but it's really easy to learn a language from what I see. You have these kids that are just fluent in languages when they're like 6 years old because they grew up learning it. But then you try to teach someone when they're, 26, it's a lot harder. Now, if you're diagnosed later in life, okay, I don't have this luxury, you're going to have to just jump right in right away. But I think taking ownership and saying, I'm going to make this into the best thing that ever happened to me, I'm going to live such a healthy life because of it, it's all in the attitude. Omnipod versus T:slim. Someone wanted to switch to the Omnipod from the T:slim, and I'm someone who recently did that. So I would feel as though I am qualified to discuss. I'm qualified regardless, but you get what I'm saying. So as someone who's done this relatively recently, I still use both. I will fully transparently say I still use both. I've talked to a couple of patients like, I thought you were using the Tandem again. And I'm like, I do at times. So the biggest things I can say, there's no, particular system that's best. It's best for you. I don't use the algorithm for the Omnipod 5. I think the Omnipod 5, and I will say this, stand behind it, at the moment on the market is the least effective algorithm that is out there. It is far too conservative. It does not make adjustments at the speed that it needs to. And as a result of that, patients end up with higher blood sugars for longer than they should. And it just is what it is. And again, there's ways to dial it in so it's better. But even still, like if you're looking for averages in the 120s, 110s, you're probably not going to get there. If you want 140s, you're probably just fine. But on the flip side, Tandem Control-IQ, I don't use that either. I use my Tandem and Basal-IQ, which means it just shuts off if I'm going low. I use the DIY loop that Tidepool runs it. It's been approved FDA. I love it. I absolutely love it. I adore it. It's amazing. And I use it predominantly because I don't have to carry anything else. It's just my phone and the pod. Yay. Versus Tandem, always got something attached to me, which that has been the biggest thing for me. The wiring, the tubing, I lived with tubing for over 20 years. It was a long time. It got annoying. I'm grateful to have another option. On the flip side, is there anything that's inherently better? Just one has no tube and one does. Also for sites, if an Omnipod site's not good, you have to rip out the whole site and salvage whatever insulin you can get. On the Tandem, you can just take out the site that's bad, put in a new site and reattach the tubing, which that's a huge advantage, massive advantage. So again, different strokes for different folks would be the best way to say it there, but there's no wrong answer. I personally think from the patients we've worked with and the experience I've had on both, I still think they're the best two systems that are out there. But I think it really depends on your needs. I think for active kids, I think for kids in general, the pod might be better because it's less invasive. You don't have the tubing. It's easier to just be there. If it comes off and if something happens, you just put a new one on. But again, at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong answer. You still have to make sure that you have control. You still have to be counting the carbs. You still have to be paying attention to activity, making the adjustments and have a good care team. But it's really going to come down to a personal dependence kind of thing. And then the last big topic here, and this one's a fun one, inhalable insulin. Someone was asking, I've heard of this. Is this a legit thing? It is. There's one called Afrezza. It is magnificent. And some people I know, we've had patients that use it for all their meals. We've also had people that use it just for stubborn, sticky high blood sugars, which is what I personally use it for. And the cool thing with it is it's inhalable and it's in and out of your system in 90 minutes. So as most insulin, 2 hours, 90% of it's out of your body. So if you take a dose at 1 p.m., by 3 p.m., 90% of it is gone. 10% of it's still there in this long tail that takes a little bit to get out of your system. But at the same time, what most people are used to dealing with. Inhalable insulin, you take it and within 90 minutes, it is all gone. And with Afrezza, it comes in different increments. So it comes in 4s and 8s and larger increments. 4 units of Afrezza is equal to 2 units of your typical Humalog or Novolog. 8 units of Afrezza is equal to 4. So you have to keep that part in mind when you're doing the math. But like I said, it's fast. So if you, for example, had a meal and you took, I don't know, I'm going to make this up. Your insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 10. You needed 40 carbs worth. So needed 4 units. You took an 8-unit cartridge. You take that, you'll know if your insulin's on point or not. Because if you need to take more, you'll already be high. Like all the feedback will be done an hour and a half later. You're good. Caveats though, you drop fast. I'm talking so fast. The first time I ever took it, it was wild. I remember going from like 240 to 80 in the span of an hour, maybe. It was fast. Again, I landed at 80 and just hung out there. It was great, but that was really quick. I was not expecting that at all, especially as, again, someone who had never used it before. But when your blood sugar is stuck in the mid 200s, the high 200s, and you need it to come down and need something to push it, it is magnificent because you're not getting a ton of it, right? If you take a 4-unit cartridge, it's only 2 units, but it's enough to usually kickstart the drop. And at that point too, it's out of your system in 90 minutes. So if you're, post dinner at 7:30 p.m., oh no, my number's high, and you took it, 9 p.m., you know what you need to do again. Most people don't want to wait an hour and a half to 2 hours to dose a second time. They start stacking insulin. With this, it's a lot easier because you know all of it's in and out and done. So that's the advantage there. Some insurances won't cover it. Mine hasn't covered it in a long time, but there's apparently other ways to get it. I have to look into it more. But it's definitely something to have in your toolbox. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it as your primary use for insulin, like for example, your meals and all your corrections, but having it as a break glass in case of emergency option, I think would be amazing to have on hand if you're able to get it. And like I said, I think there's a lot of benefits to it. There are no longitudinal effects of, hey, what does it do to your lungs? Because there's no longitudinal effects of what it does to your lungs just because it hasn't been around long enough. But at the same time, it's something that is definitely worth looking into, worth considering. And you have to, I think, have to do a lung capacity test before you start it. But that being said, those are the questions that I was able to pull from social. I hope you got something out of it. If you've got questions you want in a future episode for me to answer, drop comments below, shoot me messages over on Instagram or TikTok at manofzeal, MANOFTZEL. And of course, if you're looking for a higher level of support, you want a care team that gets it, that can help you. My team and I are all registered dietitians. We're all living with type 1 diabetes ourselves. We all have exercise backgrounds and we're all here to help and might even take your insurance. So if you're serious, holler at me, shoot me a message, let me know what's going on. Happy to see how we can support. If you're loving the show, drop us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, wherever you are listening. And with that, I will see you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.